That is now underway. All right. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Again, this is the Preserve Minnesota Conference, and this afternoon session is on National Park Service grants and the CLG program. I'm Mike Coop with the State Historic Preservation Office, CLG coordinator. I will be moderating this session this afternoon. And as we begin, I want to read our land acknowledgement again. We want to recognize that Minnesota history spans at least 13,000 years. The vast majority of that time is represented by American Indian history alone. And from that perspective, our urban and rural built environments are very recent. The state of Minnesota, as it's been known since 1858, is within the ancestral homelands of the Dakota and Ojibwe peoples. The 11 tribal nations in Minnesota are our partners in advocating for recognition and protection of the state's cultural resources, along with other Native nations with historical connections here. The State Historic Preservation Office is currently in the final stages of completing our statewide historic preservation plan for the next decade. Among other goals, we seek to broaden the scope and equity of historic preservation through, the scope and equity of historic preservation through identification and designation of more properties important to tribes and underrepresented communities, including traditional cultural properties, cultural landscapes, archaeological sites, and buildings and structures. So we encourage you to be part of this effort, to work with us and others to build partnerships and advance historic preservation efforts across the state. So this session, like all of our others, is being recorded, and it'll be available for on-demand viewing after the conference. We have set aside time at the end of the presentations for Q&A, so feel free to ask questions, and we'll get to those as time allows. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters for this afternoon, Megan Brown and Marla Collum, both with the National Park Service. Each have very important roles to play with regard to the grants and have long and significant titles that I'm not going to bother saying at the moment. But I encourage you to find, if you want, much more detailed information on their backgrounds, their professional histories, and so forth, contact information as well on the Minnesota SHPO Conference homepage. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan, who will start the presentation, to give her control so that she can start her PowerPoint, and you should have that.
Okay. Let's hope this all works.
I have confidence. Starting to share.
Okay.
There it is.
All right, let's make it play. Perfect. I love it when technology works. Right? Okay. Well, thank you, Mike, for having us. It's nice to be here with everybody. And unfortunately, it's not in person. I think one of the last conferences I got to go to and speak in person was y'all's a few years ago now. So
in St. Cloud.
Yes, it was in St. Cloud. Yeah. So we're back, and Marla's going to share some time with me today with Mike chiming in from the Minnesota perspective. And we're going to talk to you today about our Certified Local Government Program, which I hope several of you are members of. And if you're not, hopefully by the end of this, you'll want to join the club. And also the large number of competitive grant programs that we now have available. And your timing is perfect because we are just starting to put the announcements out for the 2021 funding that we have to give away. So it's perfect timing for doing this. So let's dive into this. So I'm chief for the state tribal local plans and grants, and that is a very long title. So we do shorten it up and call it Steel Pig. So if you can remember that, that will get you to our website, just nps.gov/steelpig, and that's a lot of good information on the grant programs. And we are going to cover a lot of information today. We're happy to share this PowerPoint. You'll also have the recording, and then most of this information is available on the web as well. So I hope you listen and don't just take frantic notes. Let me make the PowerPoint advance. There we go. Okay. So just thought I'd kind of start out with what is historic preservation, and where does the Park Service and all their money kind of fit into it. And I always kind of like this little slide, you know, about what people think we do. The developers are, you know, we're trying to stop them. We're riding in the cavalry to save the buildings. But then I feel like Marla and I, especially these days, feel like what we really do is sit with not a pile of paper anymore, but on a video screen. So I know we're all looking forward to that more hands-on approach to preservation that all of you may be participating in to come back soon. But what really makes preservation happen in our country is, you know, it really started on the private side. It takes a long time for the federal government to figure it out and realize that we've got to have some legislation to help protect the things that make our country special. And so Ann Pamela Hunt Cunningham, Mount Vernon, saving that important site from developers, even at that point in the 1890s, really kind of kicks off the movement. And then other communities join on with local preservation protections, like in Charleston, South Carolina, which is our first historic district in 1935. So the federal government then joins the act in the 1960s with the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act. And that's what creates a lot of things that we're going to talk about today, as well as other types of incentives you may have heard of, like the tax credit program and that type of thing. So really preservation operates kind of in two sides of things. And I know y'all heard from Brent Legg today from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and that's the private sector of preservation. And when you're looking at trying to find funding for your projects, it's important to look on both sides of the coin, of the preservation coin, private and public. And certainly the National Trust has a lot of grant programs, fairly new grant programs out and available that do mirror and partner with our grant programs as well. So definitely something to look for. There's other national level private organizations like Preservation Action, the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, which I'll be mentioning as a partner that we work with, the Main Street Center as well. And then at your state level, you have your own statewide nonprofits, heritage areas, and then you may have local preservation organizations or historical societies that you work with. And they're all an important part of the network, because often the nonprofit groups can do things that the government groups can't, right? So, and most of these are eligible grant applicants for us. So looking at some partnership opportunities might be something. So on the public side, most of this is formed through the National Historic Preservation Act. Passed in 1966, it creates the National Register as a planning tool. If we don't know what's out there, we can't save it or avoid it or keep federal projects from impacting it. And so that's what Section 106 of the Act is about, making sure that federal involvement doesn't hurt historic properties or sites or archaeology. It also established the system for state historic preservation offices. So there's one in every state appointed by their governor, and they are really the backbone of preservation as far as I kind of see the preservation movement. We work closely with them as our partners, and the states run a lot of our programs. So you'll see when you want to do a National Register nomination or a tax incentive application, their first contact will probably be at the state level, because we ask them to assist us in running all of those federal programs that the National Preservation Act gives us. So in the 1970s, they figured out we need a way to pay for all of this and created the Historic Preservation Fund. That is authorized at $150 million each year through 2023. So we have a bit of a deadline coming up. And it is funding that comes from offshore oil and gas lease revenue, not tax dollars. So the idea being the sacrifice of one resource is it leading to the preservation of other resources. And also in the 80s, we created the Certified Local Government Program, because we realized we had the national and the state piece, but not the local. And then we add the tribal programs. So we now have over 200 tribal historic preservation offices across the country. And they're an important partner with us as they take on some of the responsibilities that the state offices usually have. So you can see that kind of laid out here. Federal level is the National Park Service is the lead agency for historic preservation. The Advisory Council for Historic Preservation works with that Section 106 review that helps guide federal impact to historic sites. our tribal partners, and every federal agency has a federal preservation officer as well. You might not know that, but they do have one. So if you're having an issue there, it might be someone to reach out to. And then our states and our certified local governments, as well as other local preservation commissions and county historical societies. So kind of the public side of things. So how does that all work together? Well, we like to call it the Federal Preservation Partnership Program, and that's really the purpose of our office, is to help manage and guide that partnership program. And it is one of the places that I do think all these levels of government work together along with the private sector. So it's a pretty good success story if you want to look at it. So important to understand that everybody fits into this, and it has equal importance and shares in the responsibility of taking care of our cultural resources. So let's talk about money, because I know that's why y'all are really here, right? I used to say that money doesn't grow on trees, so we were very thankful for the funds that we had. Lately, it feels like money grows on trees. So we are at the point of, this is the most funding we've ever had for this Historic Preservation Fund and the most number of programs. So if you can't find a program to fit into, I'm not sure. You must have a very unique project. But hopefully we're going to describe to you some ways that you can tap into the Historic Preservation Fund and move forward with something your community is interested in doing. So let's think about this from the perspective of a block grant for our non-competitive funds. So the fund is really split up into competitive funds and non-competitive. And I'm going to talk to you about the non-competitive piece because that includes the Certified Local Government Program. And Marla is going to cover the competitive side a little bit later. But thinking about it as a block grant that we give out, and we give those block grants out to the states and to the tribes. The states' block grants are a little bit bigger. And of that money we give to each state, 10% of that money has to be given to certified local governments. So if you're one of the CLGs in Minnesota or another state that might be listening, you have direct access to this pot of money that has to be spent on you and can't be spent on anybody else. So that's an important piece of this and part of the partnership that we've set up. There's also technical assistance from the state, and Mike provides you with a lot of assistance in those ways. But there is that section of the act that actually makes this happen and ensures that you guys have a little funding each year. In addition is the funding to our tribes, and I need to update the slide because we're well over 200 tribes right now. And they do get a smaller amount each year, but use it mainly to fund staff in their office and do preservation work internal to the office, those types of things. Okay. In addition to kind of those types of grants, we also get occasionally emergency supplemental grants. They usually tend to follow hurricanes, but not to say that we couldn't get one for something else. It is a fairly political process in that Congress appropriates this money. And so thus far, only hurricanes. But it is open to states and tribes when we do get that funding. And currently we're managing 2 rounds of that programs for disasters that occurred in the states with Harvey, Irma, Maria, and Florence, and U2 and Michael. So I just wanted you to be aware of that funding, that it is out there and possible. So let's talk a little more about the CLG program. We're now up to 2,068 CLGs, which is a pretty exciting number across the country. So that's 2,000 partners at the local level. And if you aren't sure if you're a CLG, you can go to our website and you can search under Find a CLG and your state, and it'll be able to tell you that. It'll also give you contact information for your state CLG coordinators in case you aren't one and you'd like to become one. So I encourage you to kind of check on that and see what's available. When you become a certified local government, you're kind of making an agreement with us to become part of the partnership. So you're actually signing an agreement with the state office, and that agreement is then certified by the National Park Service. And there's some key minimum federal requirements that you have to meet. One of those is you have an established preservation commission. It follows your state enabling legislation, all those types of things, but a commission that has members that are qualified. So those qualifications may be defined as you might need an architect or a local historian or lawyer, those types of things. But it also can include members that have an active local interest in history and the community. So that formation of that commission is key. And then that commission and the community itself, because we're actually certifying the community, not just the commission, has to agree to enforce any relevant state and local laws. So what that means is if you have state level preservation laws, you need to play a role in making sure those are held up and enforced. And then if you have local laws, like a local design review ordinance, local zoning types of legislation, then you need to be supporting those. Does that mean you have to do local design review? Not necessarily. And each state kind of runs their CLG programs a little bit differently. But that is one of the things we ask. We also ask that you maintain a survey and inventory. So just like the federal government tries to maintain the National Register as a planning tool, we would like for the CLGs to maintain that, knowing what you have so you can protect it. And then we really see you as kind of the experts in historic preservation in your community. So that means public participation at your meetings, making sure the public knows where your records are, and then you participating in the National Register process. Those are all things that a certified local government is expected to do. Now, in addition to that, and I'll let Mike chime in here in a second, is each state is allowed to create their own state CLG procedures. And in that, they may add on additional responsibilities, perhaps like attending training each year or something like that. And that could include annual reporting that you might do. And some states do more than others. So it allows for a very flexible program across the country that can fit the needs of different areas that might have different thoughts on, property rights and what you can do with things and those types of things. And that's kind of the beauty of it. But it also means that everybody's a little bit different. So Mike, do you want to talk anything or talk about the state program at all and what?
Well, yeah, just to echo what you mentioned, Megan, we have always had that requirement for the CLG's mandatory attendance at our conference. Generally, it's at least one commission member, preferably more than one, and then if there's a staff person as well. It's considered, the conference that we're doing right now, and the one that we do every fall, is considered the primary training mechanism for the commissions. Some states have separate training opportunities. We haven't been able to do that quite as often, so that's why the conference is really kind of critical as far as that's concerned.
Great. Okay. Let's talk about the fun stuff. The CLG projects that the Park Service is working on, and then some really successful CLG grants. So remember that 10% that's coming from your state office is going out to you, the communities, and you're coming up with really exciting projects to do, right? They're not all exciting, but they're all useful. So we're gonna give you hopefully some ideas of things to do. But let me first just touch on some things the Park Service has going on. So one thing we've created is we call it our Gateway to Certified Local Governments app. It's a web app and GIS based, and that's about the extent of my knowledge and how it all works. But this is GIS based to kind of show you where all the communities are in the, sorry, I'm getting a flash flood warning in my watch while I'm trying to talk, which is kind of interesting. You can see the CLGs in blue all over the country. So they're spread out, they're different sizes. They're from cities to counties to parishes to boroughs to villages, etc. And our real kind of intent with this was to map out and show how certified local governments interact with national park sites. And one of the things we discovered in doing this was that 85% of the national parks have a CLG that is a gateway community to that national park. And so that's been a real good selling point for us inside the Park Service to talk about the importance of the CLG program, but also might be important for you. If you are living near a park, you want to know the contact information for that park, that's all available through this app, which is kind of nice. In addition, we've uploaded a lot of federal layers of information. So if you're needing to figure out where heritage area boundaries are and how they might intersect with you, or BLM land or forest. These are all layers that you can turn on and kind of see what kind of federal impacts might be coming to your community from different agencies. And then we've also uploaded the National Register data. Caveat that this is the Park Service's National Register data, so probably not as precise as what you might be able to get from your state office, but also a way to see what resources are around and that kind of thing. So just wanted to share that with you. We're pretty excited about it, and hopefully you can make some use of it. I mentioned earlier one of our private partners, the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. And one of the things that we often spend CLG funding on, and I think some of you have probably participated in this, is CAMP, so Commission Assistance Mentoring Program. This is training specifically designed for preservation commissions. So not only to give you training in the preservation side of things, but also in the legalities of being on a commission, how to run meetings properly, those types of things. And often a community may apply for CAMP. You may do CAMP with a conference. Michael, have you offered CAMP lately? I know we're in a virtual kind of reality, but.
Lately, as in yesterday and the day before, yes.
Oh, well, there we go. So you all know about camps than I do.
Well, it was really great. We kind of tailored it to the conference. So we ended up having 4 sessions, 2 instructors, and it was really intended for the host city, Stillwater, for the conference, for them. But we did open it up to others, so that was nice. And I think a lot of other people took advantage of it. So that, that was good. And then earlier this year, we also did have an official camp with 2 cities that teamed up together, Little Falls and St. Cloud.
So if you got a taste of camp from one of the sessions and you want more, I think Mike, being on the board of NAPC, he knows how to get you connected to that. So I think that's a real great resource, and we are very grateful to them to take on that training role for the certified local governments, because that's certainly important for us to provide. One of the things we've been working on at the Park Service level with NAPC is to develop disaster training for communities. So there's going to be some newer rollout of some different sessions, and y'all may have tapped into those. We're working on that with the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. We're also working on it with Main Street, the National Main Street Center, and developing disaster kind of resiliency training for Main Street communities. So we're pretty excited about both of those 2 things kind of getting to roll out, although most of it's virtual. But just to know there are lots of training opportunities. And in addition, NAPC, and I always try to mention this, does every other year their forum gathering in 2022. It will be in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it's a great place if you haven't been to one. It was virtual last time, to come in and get some energy from other preservation commissioners and talk to them about ideas they're having and solutions that they have found. And often there are scholarship opportunities offered either through the Park Service or your state office, and even through the National Alliance of Preservation Commission. So do you want to mention that, Michael?
Well, yeah, we've given scholarships for commission members, staff, even elected officials to attend forum for quite a number of years. And I am so looking forward to being able to actually go to Cincinnati and see it. I've actually never been to the city, and it goes without saying that this is by far the best conference that is available for local preservation commission folks. So by all means, sign up, take some money from our office. We're happy to give it to folks to let them go.
Yeah, great. We're excited about it too. It might be the next time we get out of the office, I think. Okay, so let's talk about some project ideas. Now, I know sometimes you've done your surveys and your National Register nominations and all those things, and they're very important. We want to keep those up to date. But what else can you do with CLG funding? So hopefully this will give you a few ideas. This is a fairly new project that came in from Bellevue, Kentucky, and it's called Ms. Muddle, an architectural demonstration model. And it's kind of fun. I really want to just play with it myself. But it's actually the facade of an Italianate house, unmuddled. You can see on the left. And then it has things you can add to it, like vinyl siding or bad windows, or you can take things off. So it's a wonderful kind of educational tool to show how just little things like adding shutters to this building is not appropriate, but it might be to another building. So kind of a fun example to do training in your neighborhood, you know, how to get, I think a lot of times in preservation, we all can kind of visualize and see what that's going to look like, but a lot of people aren't capable of doing that. So this is a way to kind of show them, well, if you take all of that off, this is what's going to happen. So I thought this was a fun one to share. And then we're always supportive of engaging children, getting them convinced that preservation is a good thing at an early age. And this is a Finding Huntsville in Alabama, an activity book that kids can use. And I think this will have been great to have during COVID. You could have gone outside and kind of looked at buildings and things like that. And was actually part of their bicentennial that they did in Alabama. So kind of a fun thing to engage kids with. And we're always supportive of funding things like that. One of the more typical types of projects that we would always fund are survey projects. And keeping your survey up to date is always an important thing. Just because you did it in the 80s might mean we need to update it, right? As things continue to grow older. And this is kind of an example of that. So surveying in Oklahoma on Route 66. So at one point, these are buildings we didn't think were old or historic, and now they are. And so they've gone through and done quite a bit of surveys in Oklahoma City and Tulsa both. And featured at the bottom left is the gold geodesic dome, which is one of my favorite projects that I worked to save on the endangered list when I was at the National Trust, but she's not doing too well now, but at least she's been surveyed. And then they also are looking at, in the city of Enid, their mid-century modern resources. So looking at those houses, churches, those types of things that have definitely reached the 50-year-old threshold. So kind of thinking about survey of what's next in the preservation world. Getting engaged with Section 106. It's not something a lot of CLGs do, but it's certainly a place that you can be effective. This is an example from Iowa that I just kind of love because it's a helicopter and a bridge flying. But this was a Section 106 project. And usually now is when I ask everybody, how many of you have an old bridge in your town that the DOT wants to get rid of, right? So this community did, Jones County. And with the engagement of the local community, they were able to airlift the bridge. It served as a training exercise for the National Guard with their helicopters. Of course, it became quite the moment on the news, and relocated the bridge to the entry of their state park. And you see, it's just a beautiful reuse of the bridge. And pre-COVID, they used to do a dinner on the bridge to celebrate the establishment of it. But a way for that kind of big, scary Section 106 federal agencies involved, an example of a way that a community can get involved and make a difference in that. And then teaching people how to restore wood windows is always an issue, right? We don't have that many people that have the skills. So Kalamazoo really got tired of that and took on job training. So not only did they teach people how to rehabilitate the wood windows, they also set them up with the equipment to do it. So it became a job starting program as well as a job training program. And then they recorded how to do it and provided that online. So it not only taught the individuals involved, and they've now graduated several classes of people, but it also shared that information with the public. So a nice way to kind of think about using CLG money. And although the CLG grants aren't huge often, they are small but mighty. And this is the town in Iowa that my parents live in. And my mom actually taught for a while in Minnesota, so I can have that claim. But they kind of started out in the early 80s, the very beginning of the CLG program, and basically followed kind of the roadmap that the program sets up for you. So that survey, those nominations, created a commercial district, then created a residential district, and then started to use those to get grants. So they've achieved some large Main Street grants for their downtown. And they've also recently succeeded in getting Amtrak to reopen their passenger depot. And for those of you in train towns, you know that's an important thing. And they also have the Viking Cruise Line docking, and people getting off the cruise boat and coming to see what their cute town is all about. So even though they're not huge grants, you can do a lot with them. So I don't want you to be discouraged. Think of it as a step-by-step process. And I've talked about a lot of different examples, but I want you to know we have about 3,000 examples on our integrated resource management site, IRMA. And you can look up by different types of things under the Historic Preservation Fund. So you might be doing design guidelines in your community. Maybe you want to look at what other people have done and got ideas, or maybe you want to have some things to show to a consultant you're hiring. Historic structures reports, brochures, all kinds of things are available here. So I want to encourage you to kind of look there if you're not sure what to apply for this year. And just as a reminder, if you don't spend your CLG money, we do take it away, and nobody likes to take money away, especially me. So make sure you're helping Mike spend that money every year. That is it for the CLG section. Mike, did you want to add anything in before Marla starts in on competitive grant programs?
Just to reiterate, as you said a moment ago, how important it is to spend that money, because we've had a couple of narrow close calls where, you know, we have that 10% allocation. Generally, we try to award a little bit more as a cushion, and then have had projects potentially not reach their full budget, or they don't get going in the first place. And so, you know, we end up not awarding quite what we anticipated. So as you said, it makes it difficult for us. We don't want to have to give that money back to you, the Park Service. We want to spend it locally. So that's why I always want the CLGs to, you know, contact me. And what's interesting is, even though we have 45, 46 cities that are certified, generally in the last literally 5-6 years, it's always about 10 cities that apply for funding. And we generally give in the neighborhood of about $115,000, $120,000 every year. So those numbers don't fluctuate a great deal, but I'd love to see them go up if possible.
So if you haven't applied in a while, now's the time. Now's the time to try.
Correct.
Great. Well, I will turn this over to Marla, who has a wonderful start off slide. And she's going to change slides.
Thanks, Mike, for inviting us today, and thanks, Megan, for sharing the presentation with me. My name is Marla Collum, and I'm one of the grants management specialists at the Park Service in Steel Pig. But long ago, I was a Minnesota resident, so I just hope that you will see me as an honorary Minnesotan. I lived there from age 1 to 4. That's me on the little yellow snowmobile with all the kids in our neighborhood. And I wasn't quite ready for skates and a chair, so I have my boots on and a little truck, I think, that is helping me get around in that bottom photo. But, you know, good training to be a preservationist. We lived in Plymouth, Minnesota, and those were good times. So next slide. So today I want to talk about our competitive grant programs. I'm sure that when you're going about your work and you're meeting property owners or people who are passionate about historic buildings, the two things that you'll never hear are, we've got plenty of money and our building doesn't need anything. That's just something that, you know, as a historic preservationist, you will almost never, ever hear. So I wanted to tell you about some of our grant programs. And like Megan kind of alluded to earlier, the theme that we're going to see is that they're growing. We have more funding than we've ever had before to award. They continue to grow and be reauthorized. And we now have more programs than we ever have. So these are 7 of our programs that I wanted to just touch on briefly so that you'll You'll know what kind of the primary features are and the requirements and who's eligible and those sorts of things, because we could really use all of your help in, spreading the word, because I know that, maybe for us, we think of the National Park Service as kind of the, the keepers of the Historic Preservation Fund, and that, we award these grants. But I don't think a lot of people do think about the National Park Service as, this grant maker for historic preservation. So please make sure that that becomes part of the conversations that you have with people. So we'll start with the African American Civil Rights Program. And that, that program, we have, let's see, oh, here we go. We have a photo of 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. Yesterday was the 58th anniversary of the bombing at the church that killed 4 young girls who were attending Sunday school, and it injured more than 20 others in the congregation. That is a project that we have funded through this program. And so the program is really meant to document, celebrate, preserve the places where these things happened. So was it a tragedy? Was it a site where strategies were being developed? So think about, as you go about your work and you're learning stories about sites, was this a place where civil rights activities were happening? And so we have 2 different types of grants that you can apply for. One is preservation, which would be more of the bricks and mortar, as we would think of, to preserve and restore those buildings. And then also history projects, which would be more of the documentation or the interpretation of, a site or collections as well. And so these grants are open to SHPOs, TIPOs, local governments, and nonprofit organizations. So of course, CLGs would definitely fit in with that, being a local government. And then on the next slide, I just wanted to tell you about another program, and you can also just take a look at how much of an increase we're seeing in the appropriations for this grant program each year. The photo is a young girl named Leona Tate, who was 6 years old in New Orleans, and she was escorted to school with 2 of her friends by federal marshals. And those 3 young girls were the first to attend formerly all-white schools in Louisiana. So at a very young age, really a civil rights leader in their own right. And if you go to the next slide, I want to show you a picture of Ms. Tate today. It's a really great story because she and the 3 girls are still friends, and they have, Leona Tate developed her own nonprofit, purchased that same school, and is converting it to affordable housing for seniors, and also a civil rights center. So those 3 girls, are still civil rights icons of their own. So I also wanted to point out that all of our grant programs will be announced as far as the applications this fall and early 2022. So like Megan said, we're at a very good point in our sort of cycle of grant making, that all of those applications, including this one, will be available in the next probably month or so. So please keep an eye on our website so that you don't miss this opportunity. But typically the fall, late in the year, and maybe January and February of the following year is when our applications are available.
And Marla, I'll just chime in real quick. I actually got the opportunity to meet Leona Tate at the building, and she toured us around. I get chills every time I talk about it, but she told us about how she had to eat in the building. She couldn't go to the cafeteria because they thought she might get hurt. And I guess the marshal that escorted her actually felt this was one of the most important things he'd ever done in his life and had his ashes scattered on the grounds of the school. So I think what's really amazing about these grants that we're doing now is the stories, the untold stories that we're telling, and how important they are to all communities. So yeah, I just always like to share that.
Yeah, it was a really compelling story, so much that we've actually funded this project through both our African American Civil Rights Grant Program and Save America's Treasures, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But if you want to know more about this particular project and this, amazing story, it's actually featured in the current issue of Preservation Magazine that's put out by the National Trust. So if you wanted to read more about her and her story, that'd be a great way to do that. And let's see, the next program that I wanted to talk about is our History of Equal Rights, or HER program. Although this is not exclusive to women's rights or the passage of, the voting act for women getting the vote, but this is for grants to preserve all Americans' struggle for equal rights. So this particular example is an image of Alice Paul's childhood home. This was Alice Stokes Paul. She led the fight for American women to win the right to vote in 1920. She also authored the Equal Rights Amendment in 1923. So our grant is going to be funding repairs to this house, such as structural issues with the porch, the roof, things like that. So again, this is one of our newer programs. We just awarded our first round of funding. And then as you can see for next year, which is actually fiscal year 2021, we will have 3.4 million as opposed to the 2.5 that we had for this year. So keep an eye out for this application. Again, states, tribes, local governments, nonprofits are all eligible, and it can fund, those physical preservation needs that many of our buildings have. And then after that, I'd like to talk about underrepresented communities. And this refers to being underrepresented on the National Register of Historic Places, or in National Historic Landmarks. So what this program is doing is funding the surveys, the documentation, the designation of historic properties that are associated with those communities that are currently not represented well in the National Register of Historic Places. So one example that we just awarded is in Portland, Oregon. So this would be one of those properties that will be surveyed. And, Portland has a really long legacy of LGBTQ leaders, events, and businesses going back to the 1880s. And despite that long history, there's really no inventory or designation for those properties and their associations with that community until very recently. So this grant is going to provide funding for survey and the development of a context statement and National Register nomination. So again, open to SHPOs, TIPOs, CLGs. And it's really up to you to kind of pitch the idea to us, what is that community that you might have in your region or your community that is underrepresented on the National Register. And so we see that as kind of like that first step of putting that building or that district on a good path, for preservation planning.
And Marla, just say real quick that this is one of the advantages to being a certified local government, because this program is just open to CLGs, not all local governments, not all nonprofits. So.
That's right. Yeah, so next up we have Save America's Treasures. This is one of our more well-known programs because it was very active from 1999 to 2010. It kind of went away for a little while, and then it was revived in 2017. So we have been awarding grants again from this wonderful program with, you know, projects all over the country in all 50 states, territories, and the District of Columbia, and some amazing projects that are nationally significant. And so that's the real key point here, is that it's not enough to be on the national register. You need to be listed at the national level of significance. And on kind of newer national register nominations, that's literally a checkbox. So make sure that you confirm that your property is nationally significant. And so I wanted to show this example of Christ Church Lutheran in Minneapolis. And that was a 2010 grant that focused on the exterior masonry and actually re-securing that giant cross that you see up there. So this is probably a good time, and I could have mentioned this earlier, but one question that we often get is, do you fund religious properties? And the answer to that is yes. I mean, we very regularly and often fund churches, synagogues, and other places of worship. So if that's kind of a misconception that you're hearing, you know, please make sure that people are aware that we do fund religious properties. And then on the next slide, again, look at these numbers, folks. From 2017, it kind of makes Megan and I, makes our head hurt a little bit when we think about how much funding we will have in the next round, 25 million to award. So please, again, spread the word. One distinction about Save America's Treasures is that a one-to-one match is required. That does not need to be cash, but if it is cash, it does need to be from non-federal sources. But a lot of our grantees will work with donated services, donated materials. So please don't let that be a deterrent. You know, we can talk about ways to match those dollars. And also we've seen it very successfully used as a tool to leverage other funding. If you have a donor, you can go to them and say, look, we've secured $500,000, but we have to match it. That's the only way we get this funding. And so we've seen that very successfully used to leverage other funds from other donors.
Marla, if I can just interject for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Nice to be able, excuse me, to point out that I understand from a news release that we got that we have a new SAT grant recipient.
Mike, you're jumping ahead. You're stealing my thunder.
Oh, sorry. I didn't say the name yet.
Okay.
My apologies.
There it is.
Ta-da!
Yeah, this was our late breaking news. We have a new grant that was awarded on Friday last week, and this is for the Plummer House, the water tower in Rochester. Some of you probably know that Dr. Plummer was one of the founders of the Mayo Clinic, and this water tower was the water source for his property, his home. And so that very top portion of this tower was the tank room. And so that provided the storage for the water from the well that was drilled below this, and also provided the water pressure, you know, being the water tower. And so we just awarded this grant on Friday. So we were so excited that we could include some news about this. And so our grant funds will be providing repairs for the roof, and also a lot of masonry repair, and then wood repairs like the trim and the balconies and that sort of thing. So there's another great example of Save America's Treasures in your communities. So we'll go on now to the next program is Tribal Heritage. And we were really happy to see your focus in Minnesota on recognizing the fact that, you know, our tribal heritage is in so many places and so many undiscovered places and stories that are not being told, and cultural practices that should be documented and preserved. And so that's exactly what this program does. So the tribal heritage grants are open to federally recognized tribes, Alaska Native villages, and Native Hawaiian organizations. And so again, this is for projects like survey, an inventory of significant places, documentation of traditional skills, preserving a property that is National Register listed. So it could be a bricks and mortar project. It can be comprehensive planning for that tribe, oral history, documenting traditions or trades or crafts. And a lot of focus on education and interpretation. So wanted to point this out because this is another program that, you know, like all of them, will be available this fall. So if you're working or you're have a tribal affiliation, make sure that everybody knows about these grants as well. And then next up is a program that's near and dear to my heart because I am the program lead for this program. So I talk about it all day long, but it is our Bruhn Historic Revitalization Grants Program. And what's really unique about this program is that we award funds very much like a block grant, and then the grantee will design and administer their own competitive grant program. And I want to really draw attention to this because CLGs are eligible to apply. This is something that is you know, you're uniquely positioned to apply for this type of program. And the other key point I want to make is this is one of our few opportunities where I would say the vast majority of these subgrants go to private property owners. And that can be a very tricky way to, you know, go out and seek and find funding for a property owner that does not have a nonprofit, that does not affiliated with a municipality or that sort of thing. So you're developing your own subgrant program, you're doling out the money in a competitive process, and look at what we've got. We'll have another 7.5 million for the next year. So we will probably have that application available either late in 2021 or early 2022. And I just wanted to point out this, the Rex Theater in Vail, Oregon is part of a program that was developed by the Oregon SHPO, and their focus is on historic theaters in rural communities. And so that's the other key point, is that the properties need to be in rural communities, and that's defined by the census, and that means 50,000 or less population. And you can restrict that further. Maybe you want to support projects that are in a community that's 10,000 people or less. That's really up to you and your discretion and the kinds of things that you're seeing in your communities. But if it's a CLG, we see a lot of, you know, think of like a Main Street program where it's a facade improvement, or it's you're helping those business owners activate empty storefronts, or you're activating the spaces upstairs. We're starting to see that a little bit too. Really creating more density in your community. Here is an example from North Carolina. The Main Street Center, National Main Street Center, is one of our grantees. They are awarding subgrants in 4 different states, and North Carolina is one of them. So here's a perfect example of a facade improvement project and restoring it back to what was hidden behind that lovely siding. So just keep in mind that you can apply for up to $750,000. No match is required, but what you might do is require a match of your subgrantees. We see that quite a bit. But again, it's what you think the market can bear. And if that would be a deterrent, then just explain that. So again, eligible applicants, SHPOs, TIPOs, nonprofits, and CLGs. You have to be a CLG, not just a local government. So keep that in mind. Like I said, you're uniquely qualified to apply for these grants. And gosh, there's so many things to say about this program, but National Register listed properties or National Register eligible. And so one of those costs that could be incurred under the program is to list properties on the National Register. So it's not only a tool for preservation, but it's also a tool for planning. If you have a determination of eligibility, you could then use some of the funding to list your district on the National Register or list individual theaters in Oregon, for example. So that's the Paul Brune program, and I would be happy to answer questions from anyone, you know, after this or individually provide our contact information. And so then the next program that we have is brand new. It's so new, we've never even awarded any grants from this fund yet, but it is a very specific and very kind of small pool of applicants because these are state-owned sites. And they would have to do with play a role in the founding of the nation. So this is part of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence that will be coming up in 2026. And so this is kind of in preparation for that. But we just wanted to let you know about this program that, you know, we will have $10 million. So if you work with a state site and it had played a role in the founding of our country, then, you know, keep this in mind and share the news about this new grant program. And then, let's see, I think I wanted to just mention a few other National Park Service resources, not always funding, but sometimes, you know, you might need some resources such as the information that you can find through the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training, or NCPTT. Great online resources. Be sure to check it out because they have a podcast series on preservation technology. They have a series of briefs called Preservation Matters briefs, everything from removing graffiti to, you know, protecting trees during a construction project. I mean, very specific and very interesting, you know, bits of information and guidance as you're working on a project. And so do keep that in mind. They do testing, they have their own laboratories and are looking for better techniques and resources for preservationists. The American Battlefield Protection Program awards funding, 3 types of awards for planning, acquisition, and interpretation. So get in touch with them if you're working on any type of a battlefield project. And they are also rolling out a new program this fall that will restore landscapes to day of battle conditions, which is kind of fascinating. That's a brand new kind of program for them. So keep an eye out for that one as well. Just a quick mention about Japanese American confinement sites. This is a grant program established with the goal of preserving and interpreting those U.S. confinement sites where Japanese Americans were detained during World War II. And those applications are actually available right now, and they're due in November if you're working on any type of project like that. And the I'm sorry, I didn't include that, but we do have a new African American Civil Rights Network. And there's lots of information about that on the National Park Service's website. Maritime preservation grants, and of course, the Native American Graves Protection and I knew I was going to mess this up. Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA. That's why we always just call it NAGPRA. but funding available through those programs as well. And that, of course, the goal there is returning and repatriating not only human remains, but cultural items to the appropriate parties, the tribes. So just wanted to mention some of those other sites. You can definitely find more information on the National Park Service's website. And I wanted to also mention that Steel Pig, our division that awards most of these competitive grants that we've talked about, we have a bulletin. So you can sign up for that to be notified whenever we make a new announcement of a grant, which will be happening quite often this fall. And I think at this point, we'll take any questions from people.
Well, Megan, maybe you've been watching. I think both of you can see the chat. There is one question in there right now, which is from Chris, and he's asking, can the Underrepresented Communities grant be used to hire a consultant to write a National Register nomination?
Yes, we see that often, so definitely.
That's kind of the main purpose of it, so yeah.
I'm not seeing any other questions, or at least in the chat I'm not. But I'm going to encourage folks that are in attendance right now, this is your golden opportunity to ask Megan and Marla about how to access all this money that the National Park Service has, which in my many years of working in the field, we've never had resources like this that I can recall. So,
yeah, I also wanted to mention, Mike, that all of our applications are completed through grants.gov. So one thing that we've heard from a lot of people is that you can go into grants.gov and actually set up an alert to know when our grants are being made public and the application's available. So just know that that is where you complete the application and submit it, is through grants.gov. All of them are there.
And Marla, since you brought that up, I'll just say, I think sometimes people think applying for a federal grant can be daunting, but we are firm believers that anyone can apply for a grant, write a grant. I always encourage folks to, get some assistance. You might have, you have your state office available. You also have a universities, kind of educational types of groups that write a lot of grants. And maybe once you have a draft, let them take a look at it, make sure it makes sense. Do things like make sure your math checks out, your budget adds up, and run back through all the directions. We post a very long notice of funding opportunity in it, but it has a lot of instructions in it. So kind of being aware of all those pieces. And also know that because you're tapping into federal systems, sometimes it takes a while. So don't wait till the last minute. It's definitely going to take you a couple weeks at least to get this thing together. But one of the keys to that is making sure you're signed up on grants.gov and in the necessary systems to let you do that. And that can take up to 4 weeks sometimes. So definitely, if you're thinking about it, even just thinking about it, go ahead and do that sign up part so you're ready. And then you can start working on the application. The other thing I would mention that I usually say a lot is not everyone gets funded, right? It is a competition. Some of these programs are way more competitive than others. For example, Marla's Paul Brune program is extremely competitive, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try again. But if you do, definitely come to us for your comments. We have a very expert federal staff that reviews all of these applications and provides really substantive comments. And we are happy to share those with you. And when you you get a letter from us and you might not get funded, it does tell you how to get those comments. And I even encourage grantees that are awarded to ask us for their comments, because it might help them improve their next grant application or know what to ask for next, or have some guidance on how to manage their projects. So those are kind of things to think about from the grant side of things.
I would echo that as well, that I think of the work that Megan and Marla do at the federal level. You know, it's obviously a step up from the state, but with our CLG grants, the money that the National Park Service provides, it's connected to that, and we provide feedback for our CLG grant applications. We don't always award every proposal, and when we don't, we do provide feedback, and we've had instances where the city has come back the next year and applied. They've got an improved application, and we do fund it then. And I think, in my experience, Marla, Megan, others within the Park Service are just fantastic to help the applicants and anybody that has questions. So, you know, they're easy to work with and happy to make the process as simple as possible.
I do see a question in the Q&A, I think, is in-kind work a match? It can be, and for us, it does count. But you'll need to kind of track those hours. I would recommend a timesheet that you're using to keep up with it, and then we usually value that donated time is what you would pay for it locally. So if you have someone helping you stuff envelopes, that's one rate versus having someone that's maybe come in and helping you do masonry repairs or demolition or something like that. Not all grant programs will count it, so just be aware of that. For us, it does, but for others, it might not. Some might require all cash. So just kind of understanding those programs as you go into them and apply for them is important. I think right now, our only program that requires match is Save America's Treasures. But we do consider match a competitive factor in the other programs. So if you're showing us that your community has some buy-in to the project as well, like Marla mentioned, maybe your sub-grants are contributing some match, that kind of helps because we're seeing that commitment from the community or the state or the tribe. And that might be just enough in a competitive race with some other grantees to kind of put you out in front. So even if it is maybe an in-kind kind of match, but something to think about for that.
So there's one question that's kind of directed at me. Do CLGs submit potential projects / requests for funds directly to me? Yes, they do, for the 10% allocation to CLGs. The application is on an annual basis. So generally in January, we open it up. There's an online application that the cities submit, and that's typically, we like to review a pre-application ideally, but it isn't required. And every state handles that a little bit differently. Some states do require a pre-application, but in any event, the entire process starts kind of with me, but I work with other colleagues in my department to deal with those applications. And then there's also another question in the chat. How are grant applications reviewed? What people do the peer review? Do they see additional material or answers to the questions in review?
I have some definite thoughts on that, and then I'll let Marla chime in. So you've seen all our grant programs and know that our staff is doing most of the internal review, we call it. So kind of that eligibility check, going through them the first time. And then from there, if we have a lot of applications, we do take kind of a cut. So those higher scoring projects then go to a grant panel of federal experts that then review and rescore. So by the time you've made it kind of through the gauntlet of getting a grant award, you've probably had about 7 or 8 experts look at your application. So that's why those comments are so important. But you can imagine they're doing this probably not during their work hours, probably after that or on the weekends. So following the application as closely as you can and getting your information in that application so you're not looking for things elsewhere is pretty important. We actually state that supplemental information may not be looked at. So just be careful about that. I've seen grantees sometimes say, well, look at my historic structures report on page 13. Well, if I have 60 grants to review, the odds of me doing that are probably not great. So you want to be as concise but as clear as you can in your applications, and also make sure your photographs are really good. And I don't mean make the place look pretty, because if you're wanting us to save it, you need to show some bad things. So if there's a hole in the roof and the rain's pouring through, take a picture of that. You know, the beautiful sunny day with it sitting on the hill, that's great. But we also want to see the damage. We also get a lot of bathroom pictures. I don't know quite why that is, but those are just some things to think about. And my last thing is letters of support. They have to be included with your application for us, or they likely will not be considered. And that includes congressional letters. And we tell you very specifically how to do that. If you have someone who's providing matching funds or serving as a partner in your project, that's a great reason to have a letter of support from them. So we see their buy-in. Otherwise, just going out and having people, you know, sign 200 letters of support that all look the same, I'd rather you spend that time on your application. So make sure the letters of support have meaning if you do put them on there, and help guide the project. And I'll let Marla chime in if she has thoughts as well.
Yeah, that's all very good advice. And clear and concise are the best words from a reviewer standpoint. You know, think about that person who is looking at, you know, 50 or 60 applications, and, you know, don't make them dig for the information that they're looking for. So more is not always better. Clear and concise, and that's why we, you know, provide a space and use that space, but you don't need to attach, you know, 50 other things, because, you know, like it was mentioned, that probably will just not be looked at. And yes, photos, I can't say enough about that when I'm talking to someone about, you know, what should they do to prepare for an application. Make sure you have good photos, because just imagine that reviewer knows nothing about your site, knows nothing about its history or its condition or the materials that it's built out of, you know, all of those things. And we pull in reviewers on the panel from, you know, they're federal employees, but they may be from the Smithsonian or another bureau within the Department of the Interior. So they don't always have that kind of knowledge about your project that we might in Steel Pig. So just make sure that you're, you know, presenting something that everybody will get a clear picture of what is the issue, what does this building need, and how would this funding alleviate that issue.
Great. I don't see any other questions. Do you, Megan?
I don't.
Looks like the chat, everything got taken care of there, which is amazing because we're right at 3:45, which is our ending time. It's funny how that always works out. But I want to thank Marla and Megan both for their fantastic information and their sharing all of their, you know, knowledge, expertise, and their time this afternoon. Really, really appreciate it. You guys are great. I love working with you. So thanks everybody for sitting in. And with that, I think it's a wrap.
Congratulations on a good conference.
Mike.
Thanks,
Thank you for having us.
Take care.
Bye.